Hey, welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about how to spot the next billion-dollar blockchain business. Crypto winter will be ending soon, I hope, and the smartest of us will be preparing for that and anticipating what's going to come ahead next. I do want to warn you in advance. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today might upset a few people because as you go to predict things, you need to make some generalizations, and sometimes these things upset people. So I'm just giving you a warning in advance. You might get a little fired up about this one, but hopefully it'll be a good one for you. Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Molly Elmore. Today we're going to talk about how to spot the next billion-dollar businesses that are going to be coming across the blockchain. I'll give a confession here. So I was a little bit slower to get into what we call crypto because the people that I knew in real life who were into it had this sort of arrogance about them that like crypto's so different. It's not like anything else. You have to have some sort of special thing to figure this out. And I just was busy with other things and just not interested in that game. And what ended up happening though was that a couple of these guys that I knew made a whole bunch of money off Bored Apes, like seriously hundreds of thousands of dollars on these little JPEGs. And I was perplexed. I was like, why did people give you that money? Is this real money? Why would they do that? Why would they give you hundreds of thousands of dollars for this little JPEG? And the response I got was really annoying. It was like, well, you just don't get it. You don't really understand crypto. It's not what you would expect. And, one of the guys who really irritated me the most made me this incredible offer of saying I could pay $1,000 for his masterclass where he explained how crypto worked. And if I understood it, I could then join his $10,000 investing mastermind. I was very annoyed by this. It kind of pissed me off royally, actually. And I ended up deciding at that moment I was going to understand exactly what this was about. And it led me to a very clear conclusion. And I can explain crypto to you in 30 seconds now. So we've had the internet for quite a few decades, and it was revolutionary in that it changed a couple of key things. Number one, the internet changed how information is disseminated. That could be personal information that I send from one person to another, like email, or that could be more group information, what we call content now, where this video you're watching right here on YouTube is a function of this revolution in the content communication side. The second thing that the internet did was it made transactions possible online. So I could now buy something from you using the internet, which obviously was more of a difficult thing to do in the days of mail order catalogs, and you had to go in person in most cases. The third thing that the internet did that was remarkable was it enabled the creation of connection, kind of can call these communities, but people were able to find and connect with other people who have similar interests. Again, this show you're watching right now, you're probably here because of some sort of shared interest that you and I probably have, making that assumption there. However, there was one problem with this utopia of the internet, and that there was no way to actually send money through the internet. We call that value, basically it's money. And that is what the blockchain does. It's this missing piece in the sort of evolution of the internet that will enable communities to be monetized, transactions to actually be settled, and other forms of like business activity to be conducted using the internet. But you can now actually send value through the internet. Pretty remarkable. So when it comes to picking the next billion-dollar businesses, I really strongly feel about this now. You don't have to look at this lens of like crypto being so unique and separate. We're going to talk about two things today, and we're going to break down a process that I use. It's called a predictive model. We've built predictive models in the past. There's a couple kinds of models. If you've heard that label, model sometimes just means like a formula or an algorithm for something. There are forecasting models where you try to forecast the number of people who are going to do something like go to a restaurant or buy something or get sick, or there's a whole bunch of forecasting. People sometimes forecast revenue, forecast price increases. Those are usually done in an aggregate where you're trying to forecast what a whole bunch of people are going to do or how a system will react to something. You could also forecast weather, right? This is different. We're going to talk about what's called a predictive model, where I'm trying to predict what an individual entity is going to do. And you can't predict in a yes or no capacity. Like to predict whether or not a business is going to be successful or not, that's very subjective. How do you define success? So what instead we're going to do, predictive model is about scoring. So let's say hypothetically you had 100 businesses that you could potentially invest in. Well, and you can't invest in all 100. How would you pick which 10 to invest in? One methodology for doing that is to score them all and you rank them. And then you would pick the top 10 to invest in. Does this mean those top 10 will be successful? No, not necessarily. What we're trying to do is sort of stack the odds in our favor. I want to know what bets are going to be more likely to win versus me randomly picking 10 out of 100. So the way to do that is we're going to go through some criteria that would make a business more or less successful and use those to essentially score the businesses. Now, we're not going to actually get into the literal scores themselves here. I'm just going to teach you a framework, a way to think about it, so that should you want to do this yourself, you can apply it. Now, a lot of people approach this as finance people. I'm not a finance person. I'm a marketer, an analyst who spent decades analyzing marketing. So we're going to look at this from a lens that most people generally don't. We're going to look at the actual offers themselves, and then we're going to look at the management team and the CEO. That is the other thing I think that is key, is to look at the human element of a lot of these businesses. Like, one reason, I know a lot of people in this channel associate me with crypto, which is kind of funny to me, but I realize I did that myself. But I'm a business coach and I've been a marketing analyst for a long time. And I, in my day job, advise businesses on how to sell their offers more effectively. And that training has given me a different perspective than a lot of what you would call like fundamental analysts for investments have, because I don't really care at this stage, like what their profit and loss is or cash flow or any of these sort of financial documents or whatever you want to call them. We're going to look at two elements. There are more. Maybe I'll do those in a future video, but two elements today: the offer and then the management team. Okay, first thing to understand, this label of offer is sometimes confusing to people because your offer is not your product. If you take nothing else away from this video, I want you to memorize that. The offer is not the product. Your offer is the problem that you solve for people. This is the biggest mistake I've made coaching people and when trying to make my own investments in things, is that I can't figure out what problem people solve. And if you're the CEO of a company and I ask you, what is your offer? What problem do you solve for people? And you cannot tell me that in less than 20 seconds without using any buzzwords or technical jargon around your industry, then you have some work to do. This is one of the reasons I was so captivated with Ripple immediately, was that the first time I went through Brad Garlinghouse video clips to sort of see what the CEO of this company was like, he does that over and over. He explains very, very clearly the problem that Ripple entered the market to solve. While he did use some jargon, which sometimes you have to do that, he did it in a way that he explained what those things meant. And like, for example, I had no idea what a Nostro Vostro account was before I discovered Ripple. I don't work in banking. I didn't care. And nothing in my professional world ever came across Nostro Vostro accounts. But when he explained very clearly how that is a very expensive problem for many banks to have this money sitting around the globe, and how his business is going to solve a painful and expensive problem, that was very clear to me. He understands that businesses are about solving problems for people. They're not really about products. Products are a necessary means to solve those problems. Now, the deal with problems is that you have big problems and you have little problems. Now, a business can solve many, many, many little problems for a lot of people, or they can solve fewer problems for fewer people. Some common examples of small problems is like, you might need some lunch today. Well, you can go to a Chick-fil-A drive-through and you can get your lunch. Chick-fil-A has solved a problem for you, and it has solved that fairly small problem, relatively speaking. You have a lot of choices for that, so it's not a terribly expensive solution to purchase. Alternatively, you could have some kind of heart trouble that you need a specific kind of cardiac surgeon to address. That is a much bigger problem, and that will obviously be relevant to a fewer number of people. But the people who need that problem solved will pay heavily for it. So when we talk about the context of offers and the problems you people solve, the problems that businesses solve for people, I do suggest you separate whether this is a big problem that you're going to solve for lots and lots of people, or sorry, a big problem for a few people, or if it's a smaller problem you'll solve for many people. For the most part, maybe that's too much of a generalization. I guess my area of experience and expertise has been in these smaller problems as well as smaller businesses problems. I don't really do a lot with enterprise businesses. It just hasn't been where I've have experience. The enterprise businesses certainly have problems, and they certainly have painful and expensive ones. And some of the blockchain stuff does relate to that. But I tend to be more effective at evaluating companies that either target people or target other businesses where the decision maker can make that decision. The problem with enterprise stuff is you tend to have like political, bureaucratic, government things that I'm not always aware of that affect things. So they're also very slow moving, which I'm too impatient. All right, the next thing that's key to understand after you figured out what problem am I solving for people, the next question is, who am I solving this for? How does this person describe themselves? And I do strongly suggest you avoid demographics in this. And you definitely cannot solve a problem for everybody. The only business that kind of comes close to solving a problem for everybody would be Amazon. It's really difficult to create an Amazon type thing. There's also much speculation. I happen to agree with the speculation that Amazon didn't just get to where it did randomly, that there was some serious connections there, some certain doors opened at the right time, that it will be very difficult for a random person like you or me to replicate that. So that aside, I do not recommend businesses target everybody. It's too difficult. You can't appeal to everyone. And simply because the sales pitch for a mass market brand is really difficult. Instead, it is much easier for a brand to grow quickly if they have a very specific target market who has a specific problem that they feel is unique. Everybody wants to feel like they're special and different. So I can't generally feel like a offer that someone else would find useful would necessarily apply to me. So if you can find the type of person who has this problem that is not being solved, and this person raises their hand, sometimes literally, just sometimes more psychologically, that yes, these are the type of people who need this problem solved. I'll give you a couple examples so I don't get caught in this like marketing jargony stuff. A couple years ago, I had this soap making business, and I ended up, and one of the hardest things about that was I made the mistake that a lot of businesses make. And I created the products before I defined the offer and defined the target market. And I liked to make products. So the business had way too many products, which was one of the many mistakes that I made. Anyway, so I had all these products. They were kind of all over the place because they were things that I personally liked, but that's not also how you create a business. And it was very difficult for me to retroactively fit all of these products into one offer, one problem that a specific type of person solved. Very difficult. But going through this, I figured it out. I ended up becoming a coach to other soap makers who had the same problem. And this was one of the easiest offers I ever had to market, was because there are tons of business coaches out there, tons of business coaching programs, many of whom were far more experienced than I was, had bigger teams, had better marketing, had better experience. They beat me in every particular capacity. However, none of them targeted soap makers. I literally had a blue ocean offer in that regard. We'll talk about blue ocean offer in a second. But what made my program successful was people who were out there making these soap products struggling with sales because their marketing was a mess. They didn't feel like any of those other business coaching programs spoke to them. They didn't even know that you could have a business coach. They didn't know that like that was a thing. But then I came along with marketing that was like, hey, do you have a soap making business? And are you frustrated with sales? Do you feel like you suck at marketing? And that's the biggest problem holding you back from succeeding? And they're like, yes, it's like you're inside my head. And that business would not have gotten to where it did if I had targeted everybody. And if I had been like, oh, you know what, I can help you solve any kind of problem at any day, it wouldn't have worked. So tying this back to the blockchain stuff is that the businesses that succeed in this next version of the internet, they're going to solve a specific problem for a specific type of person. And this type of person is going to feel like this is the perfect offer for them. This is why sometimes marketing these companies struggle, is because they try to do too much. They sort of do this like jack of all trades, master of none type of thing where they're like, well, we could do all these things. And then they lose their audience because they're like, well, I don't need all those things. I just need one of those things. Why should I buy from you if most of those things aren't relevant to me? It is difficult. This was why I think Ripple was exceptional, because Ripple could do tons of things, and maybe one day they will. But at the stage where I discovered them, they were very laser focused. We are solving one problem, which is the friction in cross-border payments. We understand the frustration and stress of our ideal client having to hold this money in these Nostra Vostra accounts, having to take days to process these transactions. And maybe some of these banks that aren't correspondent banks that want to be able to do this but don't have the money to have Nostra Vostra accounts, they understood that. And in a way that it wasn't like an intimidating technical jargon discussion. So that to me tells me that they're very clear on their offer. PolySign was another example. Now, I'm not really in PolySign's target market because I'm not a hedge fund that has to hold all of these digital assets for other people. But I now, after listening to them, they understood their target market. Let's just say for now that they are institutional investors, have a big problem when it comes to digital assets, a very stressful, painful problem, which is how do you store these things safely so that they don't get stolen, right? Sometimes the fears we have are quite fundamental and basic. And PolySign is there addressing a specifically painful problem in the market that leads to a lot of emotional fear and anxiety that is essentially holding back the industry. Now, when you come to look at some of these other blockchain businesses, they talk about their tech, which is cool, but I don't hear a lot of discussion about the problem that they solved. So this brings us to our checklist and what I would look for in these sort of future businesses. Let's say you have your list of 100 that you're researching, you want to figure them out. If you cannot figure out from the company's marketing what problem they solve, that's a flag. If you go to their website and you read all their stuff and you read the press releases and you listen to some CEO interviews and they never talk about how they're going to transform the lives of their clients in some capacity, that's a flag. It means they either don't understand or they haven't figured that out yet. I do want to talk for a second about blue ocean offers. That actually comes from a book. I'll put that up here for all of you to see. Blue ocean offers it's kind of more of a philosophical concept where your offer doesn't really compete, even though it looks like you have competitors. So Southwest Airlines is a good example. There's lots of airlines. Airlines got into these price wars, very competitive. If everything is the same, if airline travel becomes a commodity, then you have a lot of competition based on price. So Southwest made the choice that they were going to no longer compete with other airlines. They were going to actually compete with car travel, like road trips. And they wanted to be the better alternative to road trips. So they put themselves in sort of a new market where instead of going after your business traveler or your other type of traveler who might have already had loyalty or affinity to another airline, they said, you know what, we're going to go after the road trip people who don't want to drive that long. Or I don't remember what their exact angle was, but they went after a very different market. And so this is the idea of a blue ocean strategy, is that you may have a product that functionally is similar to other products that people sell, But when you make it a blue ocean offer, you're marketing it in a way that it's either solving a problem that the current competitive people are not solving, or you're doing it for a target market that doesn't feel like the market is meeting their needs. Great book if you want to know more about that. All right. So the other key thing to understand is this idea of a transformation. This gets a little bit woo-woo philosophical, and you sort of get into the psychology behind marketing and the psychology behind sales, which I actually do think is incredibly valuable. Another great book for one of the clients that I do consulting for is a guy named Chase Hughes. He wrote a great book named 6-Minute X-Ray. If you ever watch Behavior Panel on YouTube, you might be aware of him. And what he covers in a lot of his work is how we all sort of have a core set of needs as humans that are shaped when you're kids, and they create this desire to have a specific identity in life. All products that are bought and sold ultimately serve some sort of identity shift, especially if an individual person is making this decision. They want to be a certain way. They want to feel a certain way about themselves and about their lives. The luxury car market is a great example. There is no functional reason why anybody needs to buy like a very expensive sports car. A similar product will get you from A to B less expensively, less maintenance costs, but there are groups of people who will buy these very expensive sports cars. The question is why? It's an identity. They want to have the identity that is associated with somebody who owns that type of car, whether they're seen as significant, they're seen as affluent. There's a couple of adjectives you could use to describe that, but ultimately they want a specific identity and are willing to invest in it. It's not always about status and wealth. Sometimes like those things can be actually the inverse is the case. Like you might have somebody who goes and buys like the least expensive car possible, and they want to be perceived as smart fiscally and frugal. And that's the identity they want. They want to be seen as smarter than everybody else, not wasting their money on these expensive things. We could go on and on about the different identities that people want, but you as a marketer, or when we're doing some like fundamental analysis on investments, you want to be able to figure out what is the identity that this future buyer would want. Now, a lot of these blockchain businesses are probably not going to be in consumer goods like cars. So what are some blockchain products that could have an identity shift? Well, gaming. There's tons of blockchain games that are kind of coming along. How does the game make you feel? Does it make the player feel more powerful in this game? Maybe they're like a nerd sitting at home with their headset on, but in the game they feel like some kind of powerful ninja type. I don't know. I'm not much of a gamer, but there's some kind of identity shift that happens when somebody participates in an experience that helps them get the dopamine hit associated with this future thing. As we go through evaluating some of these businesses, if you can understand who is the target, you should be able to answer, how will this person feel after they buy this product? If that's extremely unclear or difficult to answer, that to me is a flag. The PolySign one is good, right? So let's say I'm a hedge fund manager and I buy PolySign, or I sign up for their service, however they describe being a client. I then would be able to sleep at night worried less that the assets that my clients own will be stolen. They'll be more secure. So I'm just using the argument that PolySign is a custodian and securely custodying digital assets. This gives somebody peace of mind. So what do they get to be in the transformation? They get to be less scared. Fear is a powerful sales tool. They get to be more confident that they're not going to get fired. I guess that's another fear angle. They can be more assured that their businesses will be successful. I mean, honestly, if I were I'm not looking to market for PolySign, but if I were, I would severely market the stress relief, fear removal angle, similar to how you market tax software or home security systems or insurance. Like you want to remove this variable that people are worried about and scared about. So come to the checklist. Can you figure out, has the company figured out what the transformation is? If they have not, now I could figure out what I think the company should be, but when we're doing this fundamental analysis, I want to see, does this company have it figured out? Because if they do, then they're going to be more successful in selling it. If they do not, then they will probably struggle. And they're going to be talking all about their products, not about the target market, not about the identity shift, not about the transformation that happens when you buy this type of thing. All right, now we're going to move on to talking about the management team. And this, I think, was underlooked at, underevaluated with the last sort of crypto cycle. And I say that confidently because the people who were leading some of these largest projects turned out to be totally incompetent. And if you look at some of the qualities we're going to talk about now, that would have been extremely evident. Sam Bankman-Fried is a great example. All the qualities we're going to talk about, I think, are key in a successful management team. He has none of them. So the fact that anyone gave him any money either means that people were dumb or there was something else going on behind the scenes that hopefully we will find out more about at some point in the future. All right. Why does the management team matter? Because businesses require people to sell the products, manage the client experience, and make sure that promises that are made are kept. If you are a business and you don't do what you say you're going to do, eventually that will become a problem and people will stop buying whatever it is you're selling. This is why I'm actually not a big supporter of the DAO concept. So this is a little bit not very crypto-y of me, is that people love this idea of a DAO where you have this sort of group where everyone has equal interest for the most part and we're all sort of decision makers together. Now, I'm sure that you could structure DAOs all sorts of ways. I'm kind of using the example where everyone is sort of equal. It must be like a weird communist thing where we all have this role as equals to drive something. If you've ever been part of a group that has a bunch of people, let's say a group of 10 people, and no one is in charge, I can assure you that nothing will actually get done. You might have a meeting where everybody's excited, they all decide they're going to do certain things. But if nobody is in charge managing the project or the business, it's not going to succeed. And what we're looking for here with these scorecards is we want to find the exceptional businesses that are going to rise above everyone else and be the winners in their category. So I'm not looking for entities that might do okay. We're looking for the best, the ones that are going to perform the best. And this actually comes down to, I think, the CEO. It's also easy to profile a CEO because they generally are in the public eye. You can read about the CEO's background. We live in this cool era where you could even go to events that they speak in, or you can just watch tons of clips of them speaking on YouTube. What this does is this gives you some insight into what type of person the CEO is. And we've seen in the crypto space a bunch of completely unqualified CEOs trying to run companies. Now, one thing that happens with these tech-oriented businesses is you tend to get these young guys who are smart at the tech thing, but they're totally unqualified to be the CEO of a company. They do not have the management skills or the leadership skills or even the personality skills to lead a large organization to the point where investing in it would be lucrative. There's been quite a few of them that have succeeded, I think, in spite of that, like a Mark Zuckerberg type. He's sort of one of the characters I think had an unfair advantage that we are not fully aware of. So I would not use him as a poster child example because I think there's more to that story than we are led to believe. All right, so what do I think is the most important qualities in a CEO of a company that I would invest in the next bull run, whatever you want to call it? Number one, the CEO has to be an alpha. This I know is become a controversial concept in this our modern strange world of feelings and worrying about offending people. But you absolutely want the CEO to be an alpha without a doubt, in my opinion. What does this mean? Does this mean alpha is like a jerk or arrogant? No, alphas just generally are natural leaders in their space. They will naturally rise to a leadership role when put into a group. My take is it's a concept or a skill that is formed when they're kids. Many of the alphas that I know who are successful CEOs, they grew up as the oldest male child. They're usually more male. They could definitely are female alphas, but there's more men who are the oldest sibling in a multi-sibling family, at least the oldest male child. They kind of grew up ordering other people around, for lack of a better label. Now, does that mean that the only people who would be CEOs have to be the oldest male child in a multi-child family? No. What we're talking about here with predictive modeling is we want to score all of these businesses and the CEOs and the leadership teams to see if you meet a ton of these criteria, statistically, you might be more likely to succeed than if you meet very few of these criteria. And when you have a CEO who is an alpha, they're going to have more of the qualities necessary. Again, this is my opinion here, that will drive success in the business. Sam Bankman-Fried, nothing about him is an alpha. The way he dresses, the way he acts, the way he speaks, there's nothing leaderly about him, which is why it's funny that he even had this perception of success. Now, if you want to know, well, who is an alpha that's not a jerk? There's tons of them. Tony Robbins is such a great example. If you wanted to be able to watch somebody speak on camera, I've worked with people who have worked for Tony Robbins' company. It's very well run. And the way I would describe Tony Robbins as an alpha is that he's very much a patriarch in that he wants everyone in the company to succeed and do well, but he will push them to deliver the best of themselves. Kind of in a tough love capacity in some way. If you've ever played on a sports team and had a great coach who like wanted you to do very well, that is the type of quality that a great CEO can have. And one of the things that I think is tough for these young guys, like a Sam Bankman-Fried, who have very little work experience, who then become CEO, is that they never got to model a great leader by being a part of their team. I think it's very difficult to lead other people if you've never been managed by someone. Very difficult. You don't know have that perspective of what it's like. So I tend to be more confident in experienced leaders simply because they're more likely to have been managed, seen more successful managers, and have a management style that they can model. All right, second quality in a CEO that I think is absolutely key is to be decisive. The CEO job has one responsibility more than any other responsibility at all. There's even a close second. Primary responsibility of CEO is to make decisions. To make a lot of decisions, they have to make decisions without complete information. They have to make decisions quickly. Like you can't have a great CEO who will not make a decision. That doesn't work. You can't have a CEO who gets really stressed out about making decisions or tells you like they need to take some time and they need to, ponder or ask someone else's opinion or pray about every decision. Like that doesn't work in a CEO role. Now, how could you figure this out if you don't know the CEO? Like I would watch them speak. I would listen to the stories that they tell. I would seek to, I would look to identify examples where they had to react quickly and confidently, or maybe they had to delegate. That's another type of decision. I would want to see how, I wouldn't care so much about the actual decision itself, what it was, as much as what is the framework going on here for how this CEO makes decisions. Are they a quick decision maker who will confidently do what needs to be done when time comes? Yes, that would be a check in the good quality thing. Third thing I think is sales focus. Businesses have to sell stuff. If you are the CEO of a company and you say publicly like you don't like sales or you're not good at sales, that's a negative. The CEO is also a sales role. While generally companies will have sales teams as well, the CEO has to be able to sell the product. So if you see that person on stage and they are not captivatingly describing the offer in a way that would make you want to buy it, especially if you were in the target market, that's a flag. Like they are evangelists for the brand, evangelists for the business. And if they are doing such an amazing job at selling it, it tells you that one, they understand sales, which is a skill. Not everyone has it. And two, they think about it. They're focused on it. They know exactly what they're doing. And they want to be a great representative for the company, which will go down through the rest of the culture. And it will create a culture of people who are also sales focused. This is why when you see like your techie geek guy as CEO talking more about the technical stuff that interests him, that's not a great quality in a CEO. Like, it's not going to help the business move forward and become very profitable. This is why, my personal opinion, I have tons of respect for David Schwartz, but like, he's not a CEO. That's not his role. He's a great evangelist for the technology, and I think he represents them very well, but he's not playing this part of CEO. Brad Garlinghouse absolutely does. And I don't mean this again to be disparaging about David Schwartz at all. It's just clear that those roles are what they are for a very specific reason, and it serves Ripple's interest to have David not be in a CEO role and Brad be in one, simply because of how they differ and they're just their energy, the way they dress, the way they carry themselves. So my take is, look, as we look towards this next generation of businesses, we need to identify who is going to be an incredible leader in the selling side of this, because you don't have a business if you're not making any money. The only way most of these businesses are going to make money is by selling something. Does the CEO embody kind of a sales spirit and culture? And then the last thing too is team experience. I did touch on this before, but I think it's really difficult to be the CEO of a very successful company if you've never been a member of a very successful company. You won't know what to model. You won't know what problems and mistakes to avoid. You can have people advise you on that. Like, it's not a be all and end all, but again, it's one of those things on the checklist. Do I think the CEO has had some very good work experience that would give him or her the necessary perspective? Now, I'm not saying that all CEOs have to be men by any means. I've just seen generally that this role is more attractive to men because they grew up in a system that was culture and supported that. All right. So now, last thing we're going to do is talk about sales team. So as we mentioned, the CEO needs to be, in my opinion, sales focused. I would also want to see who is selling the product. Generally, the salespeople are pretty outward facing. Many of them speak at events. Many of them go to networking events. It is not that difficult to find them and figure out who they are. A lot of them are very outward facing, extroverted, outgoing, and put themselves out there. So if I see a team that has an incredibly charismatic and skillful head of sales, that's a check in the good column. If I cannot figure out who is selling this, is anyone selling this? Is no one speaking publicly about the offer other than the CEO? That's a minus. Like, we want to see that there's a sales team. Now, I've done enough sales training that I can sometimes kind of figure out whether or not the sales team is trained. Not everybody can necessarily do that, but you can look at salespeople and tell, are they telling funny stories? Are they using some techniques like NLP? Like, are they charismatic in a way? Are they doing little things like they remember people's name and sort of little, there's all these sort of little tactics that often salespeople go through with training. If I can figure out that you've been trained, but in a good way, that's not like super obvious, that to me is a good thing. Now, sales teams also are extremely goal driven. You're not always going to have access to this information, but you could maybe figure it out if you were to talk to somebody personally. If you had the opportunity to meet the salesperson, I would want to find out how driven the company is to meet specific goals. The successful sales teams that I have been a part of and worked alongside and observed are extremely goal driven. They have a number, they make that number, they exceed that number. If they do not make that number, there are consequences. They don't just randomly sell stuff because they feel like it. They're very diligent, organized, and measurable. And that to me is a great sign for a business, I think, that's going to succeed. And then related to this is also incentives. I mean, this is why salespeople are generally very money focused, and they are very significance focused and have a strong desire and need to succeed. It's hardwired into them. It's part of their kind of core set of values that were kind of planted in their mind when they were kids. You want salespeople like that. If you have a head of sales who's like not very financially motivated, that's not a good sign. That would be a ding in the scorecard. Now, that doesn't mean that like they're selfish or like money grubbing. I don't mean it to sound that way. They might want to be making all that money so they can do really generally awesome things with it that benefit lots of people. There's all sorts of things you can do with it. But you want to see that salesperson be fairly competitive, very competitive actually, incentivized financially, and they really want the success that comes with it because then they will be highly motivated to do that. I don't see a lot of these qualities in many of the crypto businesses. So as we sort of look to the next wave, the next group, my plan is to separate them out and see which of them have these qualities, a clear offer. They know exactly who they're selling to. What is the transformation that you get by buying this product or service? Who's running the show? Do we have a CEO who's actually a natural leader, or do we have some sort of geeky kid who just figured out how to build something and now try to turn it into a business, but really has no idea what he is doing or she is doing? Do we have a sales team that is committed to selling the product and they're actually trained and know how to do that? And they have all the systems in place that most successful businesses have to actually sell these things at scale over and over. That I think would separate and kick out a ton of the businesses we saw fail in the last wave. And that's my scorecard methodology. This video went on a little bit longer than I thought. I would appreciate any comments you have about it. This is not all the stuff that I would potentially look at, but this is my checklist of the offer and how to quickly evaluate the management and sales team. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to see future videos, and we will see you in the next one.